Here it is, the game that inspired me to make these videos to begin with. This is a game that makes me roll my eyes almost every time other people talk about it, because whether they're bitching or praising, it's almost always for the silliest reasons. First, let's talk about the extremely overrated daytime stages. Really ignorant saps like the average gamer think Sonic is all about racing through the stage as fast as fucking possible. This is not Sonic as I know it. The Genesis games in Sonic Adventure 1 were about fast-paced platforming and exploration. You were capable of going very fast, but you didn't need to do this constantly. If you did, those games would get very boring and stale after a while. There's nothing wrong with a fast-paced Sonic game as long as other things are thrown into the mix to break the pace. Everything in those games was nicely evened out and rarely felt repetitive. The daytime stages in Unleashed were very bland most of the time because they had simplistic level design that hardly ever proved to be innovative. Yet they were praised for giving the player the speed-crazy euphoria of watching everything just whiz by, as if that somehow made this game unique. When I hear people saying they enjoy the stimulating sensation of rushing past everything, it reminds me of a toddler amused by keys jingled in front of their face. It's a simplistic, primitive sort of gratification that demands little on the player's part. The Genesis games were much more complex, and beating them felt more like an accomplishment than the simple-minded, cheap thrill that is Unleashed. There are so many things in this game that do the work for you. More of them are here than in any other Sonic game I've played. Cranes, hoops, rainbow rings, speed boosters, rail boosters, jump pads, among other things. All of these things contribute to a pretty dumb and shallow experience. A lot of time is spent in 2D, which a lot of people like because apparently 2D Sonic is somehow better than 3D Sonic for some reason. I like Sonic in 3D, but in this game the 3D sections are horrible. They're frighteningly linear and claustrophobic. They don't even try to feel like a 3D game most of the time. We get some decent 3D sections in Chunan, Adabat, and Eggman Land, but most of the 3D sections in this game are like racetracks. Very boring racetracks. I also think it's silly that despite being confined to linear roads most of the time, Sega boasts that there are alternate paths, sometimes splitting into 2 or even 3, as if this is such an impressive feat that really adds more depth. I know some of you probably think this is a better idea than a 3D Sonic game with wide open spaces where you could easily get lost, but it worked in Sonic Adventure, which despite having Big the Cat in it, since I know you guys are going to point that out as if he really had such a huge effect on the game, it's a prime example of what a 3D Sonic game should be like. There's no reason the gameplay that worked so well back then shouldn't play well now, but Sega gave up on that when Sonic 06, which poorly mimics Sonic Adventure, bombed. There is very little exploration, and that does hurt a Sonic game. Some claim that these stages put your reflexes to a test beyond anything seen in other games. Well, maybe the first time you play this game and you don't have a good grasp of the controls, you might mess up. But really, this game is not hard and does not require great reflexes. Some even say that holding the toggle forward for extended periods of time and watching Sonic run, as stupid as that sounds, actually requires skill. More skill than gameplay of any other kind, as if it's so hard to twitch a bit to the right or left to avoid oncoming hazards or enemy fire. This is beyond stupid. There is a big difference between making the game respond to something you did and watching the game do something by itself. There is a big difference between playing a game and watching a movie. And even though some parts of this are fun, in general it's still a lot more like a cutscene and a lot less like a game than most other Sonic titles. I think the more things a player has to do to complete a game, the better the game is, the smarter it is. Quick time events don't quite count. Because a level design is so simple, it's easy to memorize a level design and just rinse and repeat each time you play, doing things in a certain order or pattern that rarely changes much. This is not a quick, edgy experience that only the most skilled gamers can possibly play. If anything, it's one of the easiest Sonic games I've ever played, because it's so easy to follow. And the 2D sections honestly aren't that much better, stuffed full of scripted events and limited player interaction. Oh sure, there is some platforming here and there, but not nearly enough to add much depth to this game. And most of the time, the higher, better routes that do require a bit more effort to reach than the lower routes have more rails, fewer platforms, and make the platforming feel like a punishment. Like if you didn't manage to boost at the right time, you aren't cool enough to watch the game play itself for a while, so you're stuck doing what the lamos of yesterday did with their games. It's very unbalanced and encourages a player to interact with the game as little as possible. Now, I know that there are other stages. The ones I'm complaining about are only the first act of each zone, most of which have at least 3. In most cases, the second, third acts and so on are cleverly designed, thought-provoking platforming sections that have a lot more depth and challenge than the first act, and do require skill to be beaten. There are also the downloadable adventure packs, which add even more to the game. all of this together would make Unleashed a bit more interesting, but here's the thing. These are extra stages, a side dish. They play no significant part in the story. They aren't what the game mainly focuses on. You can play them, but you aren't expected to. We might as well not even talk about them. You don't need to even glance at these stages unless you didn't happen to collect enough Sun and Moon tokens in Act 1, which really isn't hard. These stages are not what the game is about. The stages the game actually wants you to play are the really stupid ones, and that's what really bothers me about Unleashed. It demands so little on the player's part and doesn't expect them to do much of anything. It's cheap, and yet because it got so much praise, people think this is what Sonic is really about. They think the daytime stages are great and the nighttime stages are what bring this game down, but the daytime stages are already bad in their own way. I know some of you think I'm being pretentious, expecting too much from a video game, that it's okay for it to be simple and easy to follow, and it doesn't need to be intuitive or thought-provoking, that nothing really matters much as long as the game is fun. But they did it with the Genesis games, and despite all the new technology, this game's design pales when compared to the standards set by games like Sonic 3K. Another thing, Sonic's speed is way too overpowered. It's very hard to change the direction you're running in, and it becomes more like a car with bad steering than a living creature. Hell, he even drifts like a freaking car to turn it all. It really is just hold forward and occasionally jump or drift to win. Again, it's not bad for Sonic to be fast, but that's about all there is to him in this game. Also, rings are fuel for a boost that makes you go even faster, which can pull even more rings to you in your wake. It does quickly run out, but you can increase your power so that you burn fewer rings. Once you've completely upgraded Sonic, he can run twice as fast as he could at the start of the game, and you can use a boost almost constantly. It's ridiculous. There's even a level up item that allows you to boost in mid-air. Sega just keeps over-amplifying the power of all their stupid game mechanics. It would be really cool if you could use this overpowered speed to manipulate the environment around you and pull off lots of wicked stunts, but you're given so little space to move around in that it's really easy to toss yourself down a bottomless pit because you boosted in a certain direction or at the wrong time and couldn't stop yourself, and it becomes something very much like those rush sections of Sonic 06. I think this insane speed could be put to good use in a 3D game with wide open spaces and needed this kind of speed to be covered efficiently, but because this game is so restricting, you have to be really careful not to venture too far from the predetermined path you're trapped in. Again, this game is not hard, and I don't get myself killed this way often, but it can happen very easily, not because of the player's lack of skill or anything like that, but because the game either has too much or too little of everything. The player has to accommodate it. There's very little you're allowed to do without killing yourself. A lot of people think they're great for some reason, but the daytime stages kinda suck. And I know you're all probably thinking I'm just whining because the game is too fast-paced for me to handle. You probably think I'm overstimulated by it and shouldn't bother to play it. But if anything, I'm rarely overstimulated by a video game of any kind. I hear people complain about so many games that, according to them, had too much going on at once, giving them headaches and making them feel nauseous. And then I play these games and I feel just fine and can't help thinking these guys are a bunch of pussies. Sonic Unleashed isn't overwhelming, it's underwhelming. It isn't stimulating enough because it just isn't enough for the player to do. There isn't a lot going on most of the time. It's just kinda lame. And now for all that other stuff. And now for all that other stuff. The Werehog gameplay really isn't bad. It just doesn't fit in a Sonic game. Most of the platforming is okay. The fighting is okay. All in all, it's okay. But people don't want to see this in a Sonic game. I loved increasing his power and unlocking dozens of awesome moves that make the fighting beautiful and fun to watch. It would be fine as a game on its own, but it isn't good for Sonic. But here's why it's there. The Werehog stages, the hub worlds, and just about everything else is there to extend playtime. They are there to make the game longer. Personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with a Sonic game being short if it has replay value, but because the daytime stages are so fast-paced and over so quickly, Sega felt pressure to add more things to the game. They realized to some extent that they needed to slow Sonic down a bit. But, just like the daytime stages, they took it too far. The daytime stages are one bad extreme, and the nighttime stages are another extreme in the opposite direction. When they aren't too slow, they're too fast. Both are really bad in their own way. Sega failed to find a good middle ground, where everything flows nicely. So they either overcompensate or don't do enough of anything. This is a lot like the speed, platforming, and exploration being blended together in the first Sonic Adventure, and then separated in Sonic Adventure 2, only this is even worse. You can't fit 1 billion miles of running space into a Sonic game, and the more he runs, the sooner it's over. The hub worlds might as well be a completely separate game. They're mostly a bunch of side quests. Just keep traveling back and forth between them and randomly talking to people. Someone's bound to ask you to do something for them. Some of these quests are interesting, like this one where a man from Spagonia was supposedly lost in a storm that left him stranded in Apatos, where he lost his memories, so he stayed there for years. After hearing a kid in Spagonia lamenting about his long-lost father, I got thinking and eventually reunited these two. It was nice. I also got so many couples hitched. A lot of these quests are pretty boring though, and some get really repetitive. Even though the hub worlds are okay in their own right, they ultimately aren't fitting for a Sonic game. I think it's hilarious though that these tiny hub worlds have more exploration than all of the daytime stages combined. There are a lot of things elaborately hidden in the nooks of some of these places, including level up items like those seen in Sonic Adventure. While I have to admit that the many places you visit are very pretty, they still try too hard to resemble the real world. A little artistic flair is added to make them feel a bit interesting. It isn't exactly like our world, but it's still too realistic to feel like a Sonic game. The humans look like something out of a Pixar movie. They're very cartoony and there's a lot of variety in their appearances. I actually like some of these humans, and they're a lot easier to put up with than those of 06 or Sonic Adventure 2. But their presence still dominates too much of the game. It's nice that they cheer at you while you're playing the game, but still, they don't feel like they belong. I think Eggman Land is the best zone of the game, if only because of how wacky and deliciously otherworldly and unrealistic it is. I hate QuickTime events, so I hate the flying sections, both of them. The flying sections of Sonic Adventure gave us so much more to play around with. I really like the enemy design of this game, both in the daytime and nighttime stages. The robots you fight in the daytime are big and burly and deliciously wacky looking, and the nighttime stage enemies show a lot of variety and they too are deliciously wacky looking. The only thing I don't like about the daytime enemies is that they're even easier than usual to take down. These guys are lighter than candy wrappers. The bosses aren't that special in the day or night stages. Most of them look awesome, but they aren't really that fun. The daytime bosses mostly involve spamming them with a boost, and the nighttime bosses, while a bit more involving, rely on QuickTime events. The QuickTime events are fun to watch and they would make great cutscenes, but just that the designers expect them to count as gameplay is stupid. The final boss is epic, but it could have been better gameplay-wise. The story is pretty lame. The premise isn't that bad, but the execution is sloppy. The beginning and the ending are awesome, but just about everything in between is lame. Most of the dialogue feels dull and forced, like the writers were desperately running out of things to talk about. There are a few good moments, but most of them are pretty boring compared to some older stories. Once you reach Autobot though, the story finally becomes engaging and compels you to finish the game and ends very nicely. I like Professor Pickle. He's a quirky character, but I just don't have much to say about him besides that. Now let's talk about this year's Big Bad God of Death. This is getting really old. Chaos was cool because he was the first of these. He was fresh and new. He was original. He also had a personality and was capable of anger, love, and in the end, reason. But in his wake have come many other monsters, all of them generic. The Genie from Sonic Riders, Iblis and Solaris from Sonic 06, Ifrit from Sonic Rivals 2, and now Dark Gaia. Most of these monsters have nothing to offer aside from trying to top the last big scary monster, and most of them are stupid. Even though monsters in Sonic games have been done to death at this point, Dark Gaia is one of the only two I like. He's the biggest, meanest, most terrifying, imposing, threatening creature in any Sonic game. When you consider his scale compared to everything else Sonic has ever faced, he really is scary, and the only monster besides Chaos that I think is awesome. As for Chip, well, I love Chip. I just do. And the reason I love the little guy is possibly the same reason a lot of others hate him. He's fucking cute! And you need a bit of cuteness in a story. He doesn't do much for most of the story, but he's a much more lovable character than a lot of other Segas farted out of their asses. Chip almost saves this game. Without him, it would be nothing more than yet another unhealthy dose of bland, generic, serious business. But his presence during those last few scenes led to one of the most emotionally gripping climaxes I've seen in a Sonic game. Orbot, aka SA55, aka Sass, well, he's awesome. Nuff said. The voice acting is adequate. I like Professor Pickle, and Jason Griffith finally stopped emphasizing everything obnoxiously and started talking like a person. He's considerably easier on the ears this time than in most of his other games. Tails is okay, but not very good. Robotnik is okay. Everyone is okay. But they totally botched Chip. The Japanese version of Chip sounds like a child, which is appropriate for him. But his English voice is a grown man. He does a good job, and in the later scenes, he sounds very passionate. It's there. But his handicap of not really being a kid makes the bond between Sonic and Chip too hilariously homoerotic not to chuckle at. The ending, as awesome as it is, doesn't feel as genuine or compelling in English because of Chip's voice actor. For his sake, I'll switch to the Japanese dub. Even though the story in general is very bland, I still think it's worth enduring if only to see the ending, which is yet to be topped, I think. The soundtrack is okay. Some of these tracks are very boring and repetitive, just doing the same beats over and over and over, sometimes dozens of times. Some of the music, though, is beautiful. I especially like Out About Night, and the final boss song has gotta be the most emotional Sonic tune I've heard in a long, long time. Sonic Unleashed has a great beginning and a great ending, but the game in general is trash. This isn't the natural evolution of what an intelligently designed Sonic game should be. If anything, this is devolution. It's a step down. It's a step backwards. It's dangerously dumb most of the time. But not because of a Werehog. The whole game sucks. It's been a long time since I've seen a great 3D or 2D Sonic game, and this makes it feel as though Sega just gave up. Overall, it's the silliest Sonic game I've ever played. At some point I'll make a video of Sonic 4 and maybe Sonic Colors, but for now, this is the last one. I hope you found more logic and reason behind my rants than those of most others. I had a lot of things I felt needed to be said, and I just hope I was fun to listen to. I certainly had fun making these videos. Thanks for sticking around this long. Toodles!
by its death.
I miss you.